My name is Evelyn May Hartley, and for 19 years, my only daughter believed I had chosen money over her. She didn't come to that conclusion on her own. Nobody does. Someone had to plant that seed, water it with lies, and make sure it grew tall enough to block out every memory of me she might have wanted to keep. And the person who did that was the man I married at 26, thinking I had finally found solid ground. I was sitting in the sunroom of my house the morning her invitation arrived. Not a card she'd mailed. A text message, forwarded through my niece because my daughter didn't have my number. Or maybe she had it and had deleted it. I never asked. The message said, "Mom, graduation ceremony. June 14th. Houston Grand Ballroom. You can come if you want." That was it. No punctuation at the end, no warmth. Just permission, extended like you'd give a stranger who asked to use your umbrella. My niece had added her own message below it. She says she wants you there, but she's nervous. "I think she wants to see you, Aunt Evie. Please come." I set my phone down on the wicker table and looked out at my garden. The gardenias were blooming early this year. I'd planted them myself, dug the holes with my own hands in soil that had taken me 4 years to get right. My hands, at 63, still have the calluses to prove it. I thought about what my daughter expected to see when I walked into that ballroom. I thought about what version of me she'd been told to expect. The desperate version. The one her father had spent 19 years describing. Then I thought about the woman I had actually become. I smiled, and I texted my niece back 3 words. "Tell her I'll come." But to understand why that moment meant everything and nothing, you have to understand where I started. I grew up in Beaumont, Texas, the second of 4 children, in a house where the windows rattled when the Gulf wind picked up and my mother stretched a pound of ground beef into meals for 6. We weren't poor by the measure of people who have nothing. But we were the kind of family where a new pair of shoes meant something, where college was a dream you had to build a ladder to reach yourself because nobody was handing you one. I built my ladder. 2 jobs through undergrad at Lamar University. A scholarship I applied for 11 times before getting, and a degree in healthcare administration that I wore like armor into every room I entered. By 30, I was managing operations for a regional hospital network outside of Houston. I had a title, a salary that felt surreal, and a 2-bedroom apartment I'd furnished piece by piece, 1 paycheck at a time. That's when I met him. My ex-husband, he was a real estate developer, or that's how he introduced himself at a fundraising dinner I was organizing for the hospital. He wore a jacket that fit too well and had a way of listening that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. I was 31. I was tired of being alone. And I was, if I'm honest, impressed by someone who seemed to have built something real. We got married 14 months later. His mother, a compact woman from Beaumont herself, hugged me at the rehearsal dinner and said, loud enough for the row behind us to hear, "She's not what I pictured for him." His sister laughed like it was a joke. I told myself it was. My daughter was born 2 years into the marriage. I named her Claudette, after my grandmother, the woman who used to press my braids with a hot comb and tell me that a woman who knows her own worth doesn't need anyone to tell it to her. I thought giving my daughter that name was giving her a head start. What I didn't know was how hard the people around her would work to make her forget it. She was everything to me. Big, dark eyes, serious face, always watching, always thinking. She started reading at 4. By 7, she was correcting my spelling in grocery lists, and I let her because it made her laugh. I drove her to piano lessons and science fairs and sat in every hard plastic auditorium chair I was asked to sit in. I packed her lunch with little notes. I stayed up with her through fevers. I was present in every sense of the word. But I was also building something else, quietly, on the side. My ex-husband's real estate company had started showing cracks. He had a habit of signing deals I didn't know about, taking out lines of credit against properties I thought were clean. He was charming enough that lenders believed him and dismissive enough that I stopped asking questions. That was my mistake. I was 37 years old, and I stopped asking questions because asking them made me feel like the enemy in my own home. When the company began to collapse, he had already prepared for it. I learned that later. He'd spent 3 months moving money, restructuring debts in ways that put my name on the wrong documents, and coaching his mother and sister on what to say if anyone asked. I found out from a federal investigator who showed up at my office on a Tuesday afternoon and asked me to confirm my signature on a series of loan applications. I looked at those documents and felt the floor tilt beneath me. My signature was on them. I remembered signing things he brought me over the years. Just routine, baby. Just paperwork. The investigation took 8 months. My public defender was a young man fresh out of law school who meant well and was drowning in cases. My ex-husband's attorney was a woman in a grey suit who had 20 years and no mercy. The jury deliberated for 2 days. Conspiracy to commit bank fraud. 18 months in federal prison and 5 years of supervised release. The day I was sentenced, Claudette was 14 years old. She sat in the back of the courtroom with her grandmother on one side and her aunt on the other. She was wearing a lavender dress I'd bought her for Easter. She didn't look at me. I don't know if that was her choice or if someone told her not to. I've spent 19 years trying not to wonder too hard about that. What I do know is what her father told her in the years that followed. My niece pieced it together for me gradually, in careful installments, the way you deliver bad news to someone who's already fragile. He told Claudette that I had gambled with our family's finances, that I'd been reckless, greedy, and that when it all fell apart, I'd tried to blame others. He told her I'd been given chances to make things right and had refused. He told her I'd chose my pride over my daughter. None of it was true. All of it was effective. Federal prison is a specific kind of quiet that you don't expect. It's not loud like movies suggest. It's a humming silence broken by institution sounds, doors, announcements, the particular rhythm of 200 women existing in close proximity without choosing each other. I was there for 16 months. I won't dress it up. It was the most disorienting experience of my life. Not because of the physical conditions, but because every day you are reminded that the world outside is continuing without you, and there is nothing you can do to reach it. I wrote Claudette 43 letters. I know the exact number because I kept a list in the back of a small notebook a chaplain gave me. I wrote about ordinary things mostly. What I was learning. A book I'd read. A memory I wanted her to have of us, just in case the real ones were fading. I told her I loved her in every single letter. I told her I hadn't done what they said I did. I never got one back. I don't know if she read them. I suspect she wasn't allowed to. I was released on a grey February morning, 2 days before my 51st birthday. Nobody was waiting for me. I had $60 from the prison commissary, a garbage bag with my belongings, and a bus route I'd memorized that would take me to my cousin's house in Pasadena, a Houston suburb, where she'd offered me her spare room. My cousin Charlotte is the kind of woman who makes room without making you feel small. She put clean sheets on the bed and a toothbrush on the bathroom counter and didn't ask me anything for the first 2 days except whether I wanted coffee. On the 3rd day, she sat across from me at her kitchen table and said, "You're going to have to decide what you want your life to look like. And I think you already know." She was right. I had decided, somewhere in the middle of 16 months of institutional silence, that I was not going to become a smaller version of myself to make other people comfortable. I was going to become exactly the woman I had been becoming before everything was taken from me. But this time with the kind of clarity that only comes from losing everything. The challenges were immediate and relentless. The felony conviction followed me everywhere. Jobs I was qualified for, positions I could have done in my sleep, disappeared the moment I disclosed my record. Healthcare administration was essentially closed to me at the level I'd been working. I was 51 years old with a graduate-level skill set, and I was being offered entry-level cashier positions that evaporated too, once they ran my background. I took cleaning work. I was not embarrassed by it, or I learned quickly not to be, because shame is a luxury and I didn't have room for it. I cleaned offices downtown at night. I cleaned vacation rentals on the weekends. I learned which property management companies treated their cleaners like professionals and which ones didn't, and I filed that information away. During the days I went to the Houston Public Library. I sat at the same table near the window for 2 years. I read everything I had missed. New developments in healthcare operations, changes in federal compliance law, the growing market for outpatient and home-based care services. The field I'd given my career to had shifted while I was gone. There were gaps. Gaps mean opportunity if you know how to look. I also started attending a re-entry support group on Thursday evenings at a church in the 3rd Ward. It was there that I met Barbara Osei, a retired social worker who had spent 30 years in family services and had strong opinions about everything, particularly about wasted potential. She took one look at my background, what I'd done before, what I'd managed, what I understood about healthcare systems, and told me I was sitting on a gold mine and moping about the lock. "You know what most home health agencies lack?" she said one evening after the group had cleared out. "Anyone who understands compliance, billing, how to keep the doors open without running afoul of Medicaid rules. You know all of that. You've known it for 20 years. I told her I had a felony record. She said, "I know. And in Texas, a nonviolent federal conviction does not automatically bar you from operating a healthcare support business. I've looked it up. I looked it up because I was thinking about you. Nobody had looked anything up for me in years." I sat very still for a moment because I didn't want to cry in the church fellowship hall on a Thursday night. Barbara became my guide and my conscience, and eventually one of the dearest friends I've ever had. She let me use her address for business mail while I was still in my cousin's spare room. She introduced me to a retired attorney who helped me understand exactly where my record created barriers and, more importantly, where it didn't. She told me once, when I was deep in a spiral of self-doubt, "Evelyn, the people who broke you were counting on you staying broken. Don't give them the satisfaction." I started small, a healthcare consulting service operating as a sole proprietor, helping small home health agencies navigate billing compliance and state licensing requirements. I charged less than the market rate because I needed the work and I needed the reputation. I worked out at my cousin's kitchen. I answered emails at midnight. I drove to client sites in a 12-year-old Camry that needed new brake pads. My first client was a woman named Iris who ran a home health aid service out of Galveston with 8 employees and a compliance problem that was threatening her state license. She'd been told by 2 other consultants that her situation was too complicated to fix quickly. I spent 3 weeks untangling her documentation, retrained her staff on proper visit verification, and filed the corrected reports with the state. Her license was renewed without penalty. She told everyone she knew. My second client came from her recommendation, then a third. By the end of my first year, I had 11 clients and more inquiries than I could take. By my second year, I had hired 2 part-time contractors to help with the workload. I moved out of my cousin's spare room into a small apartment in Midtown Houston that I furnished slowly and deliberately, one piece at a time, the same way I'd done 30 years before. My third year, I registered as a formal LLC and signed a lease on a real office. Small, 2 rooms and a shared reception area, but mine. My fourth year, I expanded my services to include direct home health care operations. I hired a team. I got certified as a Medicaid provider in 3 Texas counties. The business generated just over $400,000 in revenue that year. I almost didn't believe the number when my accountant showed it to me. My 5th year, I opened a second location in San Antonio. I still drove the old Camry. I still wore clothes I'd bought on sale. I lived well under my means because I understood, viscerally, what it meant to have nothing, and I had decided that I would never be caught unprepared again. I invested in low-cost index funds. I maxed out my retirement accounts. I built a financial cushion that grew slowly and steadily and without drama. Not once during any of this did Claudette reach out to me. I thought about her every day. I tracked what I could find from a distance. My niece kept me informed in careful fragments, the way you do when you're caught between 2 people you love. Claudette had graduated high school with honors. She'd gotten into the University of Texas at Austin. She was studying biology, thinking about medical school. She was doing well. She was also, according to my niece, still carrying what her father had built in her, a version of me that bore no resemblance to who I actually was. I hired a woman I'll call an information consultant, because what she did wasn't investigation exactly, more like careful attention to publicly available information. She confirmed what my niece had told me. She also told me something else. Claudette's father had been quietly sued by 2 former business partners in the 3 years after my conviction. He'd settled both cases out of court with non-disclosure agreements. The business practices he'd blamed on me had continued, and they continued to cause harm, just to different people. I sat with that information for a long time. I could have used it sooner. I chose not to. Because I had learned something important about timing. The truth lands differently depending on who the listener is ready to be, and Claudette was not yet ready to question the story she'd been given. Pushing too soon would only make her defend it. So I waited, and I built, and I kept my proof close. Then came the text message through my niece. She says you can come. That was June of last year. I was 63 years old. I had a business that employed 41 people. I had built a life that I was genuinely proud of, without anyone's help, without her father's name, and despite everything that name had cost me. But I was still just a mother who hadn't been able to hold her daughter in 19 years. I wasn't going to that ballroom to win a confrontation. I was going because my daughter had left the door open, barely. Just enough for light to pass through, and I was not going to miss it. I did, however, decide how I was going to walk through it. The car arrived on the morning of June 14th. I'd arranged it 3 weeks prior, a chauffeured Mercedes S-Class in obsidian black, because I didn't own anything flashy and I wasn't interested in flash for its own sake. But I wanted my daughter to look up and know immediately that the version of me she'd been told about was not the one who had arrived. I brought 2 colleagues who happened to be former federal compliance officers, both tall, both professional, both entirely comfortable in formal settings. Their presence was not a performance. It was simply a statement of who I moved with now. I wore a suit I'd bought specifically for this occasion. Deep burgundy, tailored to fit exactly right, with a silk blouse underneath and a strand of pearls that had belonged to my grandmother, Claudette's namesake. I wanted to carry her in with me. The Houston Grand Ballroom was full by the time we arrived. The doctoral graduation ceremony had already seated the families. Claudette was receiving her PhD in molecular biology. My niece had saved me a seat in the 4th row, 2 sections over from where her father was sitting with his mother. I saw his face change the moment he noticed me. He had aged, which I expected. What I hadn't expected was how diminished he looked. Not in a satisfying way, just in the way that time diminishes people who spend years managing secrets. His mother saw me a moment later and reached for his arm. I didn't look at them again. I watched my daughter walk across that stage, Dr. Claudette Hartley. She was 42 years old by that point. She'd gone back to school after her work career had started, taken the long road to the degree she'd wanted since she was 7. When they called her name and she walked forward, I put my hand over my mouth because the sound that wanted to come out of me was not appropriate for a graduation ceremony. She looked exactly like my grandmother. After the ceremony, there was a reception in the adjacent hall. My niece brought her to me. I watched Claudette see the car outside through the glass doors before she saw me, and I watched her expression shift, not with surprise exactly, but with something like recalibration. Then she found me in the crowd. We stood 4 feet apart and looked at each other. "You look like her," I said. "Like Grandma Claudette." Her jaw tightened. "Dad said you'd come try to make this about yourself." "I know he did," I said. I kept my voice gentle. I had practiced this. "I'm not here to argue with what you've been told. I'm here because you left the door open, and I walked through it. That's all." Her eyes went to my colleagues, to the car visible through the glass. "You're doing well," she said. It wasn't a compliment exactly. It was an observation she wasn't sure what to do with. "I built something," I said, "from nothing, while you were growing up without me." "You chose to go to prison," she said, and her voice cracked on the last word, which told me she'd said it before, many times, and it had never felt as settled as she needed it to. "I was convicted of something I didn't do," I said. "I know you've been told otherwise. I'm not asking you to believe me right now. I'm asking you to have dinner with me. Just dinner. And I'll show you what I can show you, and then you decide." She didn't say yes immediately. She looked at her husband, a quiet man who had been standing at a respectful distance and who gave her a small nod when she glanced at him. "One dinner," she said. We met 3 days later at a restaurant she chose. I brought a folder. Inside was the documentation that a retired accountant named Franklin Webb had signed before his death 14 months earlier. The real financial records from my ex-husband's company, showing every transaction, every fraudulent entry, none of it bearing my authorization. Franklin had been my ex-husband's outside accountant. He had testified at my trial that I had directed him to falsify reports. He had been given, according to the records my information consultant eventually traced, a contract extension worth $120,000 from a company my ex-husband controlled, signed 3 weeks after my sentencing. Franklin Webb had contacted my attorney 8 months before his death from heart failure. He said he needed to correct something. My attorney had his signed affidavit, his financial records, and his written statement that he had lied under oath at my trial because he had been afraid of losing his livelihood. I placed the folder on the table between my daughter and myself. "You don't have to read it tonight," I said. "You don't have to believe it tonight. But it exists, and I wanted you to know it exists." She picked it up. She opened it. She read slowly, the way she'd always read. Carefully, the way I'd watched her read at age 5 with a picture book and at age 9 with a science magazine. Her husband read over her shoulder. At some point the food came and neither of them touched it. After 20 minutes, she closed the folder and looked up at me. "Why didn't you fight this sooner?" I thought about how to answer that. "Because fighting it sooner would have felt like I was trying to buy your love with a legal case," I said. "I needed to become the person I became first. I needed you to see who I was before you read a single document. Does that make sense?" She didn't answer. But she didn't leave. We sat at that table for 3 hours. She asked me about the business. I told her. She asked me about prison, and I told her that too, in the plainest language I could manage without drama, because the plain truth was enough. She asked me about the letters. I told her I'd written 43. She said she'd received 4, just 4, and her grandmother had been there when she opened them and had read them before she could, and had said, "Your mother is trying to manipulate you, don't fall for it." She had been 15 years old. At some point her eyes filled. "I asked him once if you were coming to my high school graduation," she said. "He said you didn't want to come, that you hadn't asked." I had asked. I had sent a letter to my ex-husband's attorney 14 months before that graduation, asking to be notified and requesting that any restraining conditions be clarified so I could find a way to attend without violating them. I never received a response. We sat in silence for a moment. "I wanted you there," she said softly. I kept looking at the door. "My grandmother's pearls are very smooth. I know, because I was holding them at that moment, and I remember how they felt. I was looking for a door too," I said. "What happened after that was not a movie reconciliation. It was slower and more tender and more complicated than that, which is the only way real things happen. Claudette called her father 2 weeks after our dinner. She asked him directly about the restraining order, about the letters, about Franklin Webb. I don't know what he said to her. I only know what she told me he said, that she was being manipulated, that I had always been good at making myself the victim, that she should be careful. She called me afterward. She was crying. She said, "I don't know who to believe." I said, "That's okay. Take your time. The documents aren't going anywhere and neither am I." 6 weeks later, her father's attorney contacted mine. My wrongful conviction petition, which my attorney had filed quietly 8 months earlier based on Franklin Webb's affidavit, had been picked up by the district attorney's office for review. My ex-husband had received a letter informing him that he was under investigation for subornation of perjury and obstruction of justice in connection with the original proceedings. His mother's name was in the letter too. I found out through my attorney on a Thursday morning. I sat in my office, a real office, one I owned the building for, and looked out at the Houston skyline for a long time without saying anything. Then I called Barbara Ossie and told her. She said, "I always told you." I said, "You always did." Claudette called me the night she heard about the investigation. She didn't say much. She asked if I was okay. I told her I was. Then she said, "I'm sorry I lost 19 years believing them." I told her that 19 years was a long time and also not the rest of our lives, and that I would rather spend whatever time we had building forward than cataloguing what we'd lost. She said, "Can I come see your office?" She came on a Saturday morning with her husband and their 4-year-old daughter, who has never met anyone she wasn't immediately sure about. This little girl walked into my office, looked around at the photographs on the walls and the awards on the shelves, and the view of the city through my window, and then walked directly to me and said, "Are you really my grandma?" I looked at my daughter over her head. "Yes," I said, "I really am." That afternoon, I took them all to see the building I was renovating on the east side of Houston. It had been a defunct urgent care clinic, empty for 6 years, sitting in a neighborhood where healthcare access was inconsistent at best. I purchased it, gutted it, and was in the process of turning it into a free clinic and resource center for women coming out of the federal reentry system. Women like the person I had been at 51 years old, standing outside a facility with $60 in a garbage bag and no idea what came next. I'd named it for Barbara's late daughter, who had died of a preventable illness at 34 because she hadn't had consistent access to care. "This is what I did with the time," I told Claudette, standing in the half-renovated space that smelled like sawdust and fresh paint. "This is what I built instead of staying broken." She stood in the middle of that space and looked around at everything, at the walls going up and the future taking shape, and she said, very quietly, "She would have been proud of you, Grandma Claudette." I pressed my hand over my heart for a moment because that's all I could manage. "Yes," I said, "I believe she would. The legal process is still moving. These things are slow, and I'd made my peace with slow. My attorney says the petition is strong. Franklin Webb's affidavit is detailed and corroborated. The financial records speak for themselves. My ex-husband has not been formally charged yet. His mother has retained her own separate attorney. I'm not holding my breath, but I'm not looking away either. What I know is this: I am 63 years old. I have built a company that employs 41 people and serves hundreds of patients. I have a daughter who is learning, slowly and bravely, to separate the truth from what she was given. I have a granddaughter who already bosses me around, which tells me she comes by it honestly. I have a garden with gardenias that bloomed early this year, and somewhere in a file cabinet in my office, there are 43 carbon copies of letters I wrote to a daughter who couldn't reach them. I kept them all. I don't know why, exactly. Maybe because I knew that one day she'd want to read them. Maybe because I needed proof, even just for myself, that I had never stopped reaching. She asked me last month if she could have them. I gave them all to her. I've thought a lot about what it actually means to cause your own undoing. Not in a dramatic way. Just in the quiet, ordinary way it tends to happen. My ex-husband didn't lose because someone stopped him. He lost because the things he did to survive his own guilt required other people to keep doing the wrong thing indefinitely. Franklin Webb was one of those people. And Franklin, at the end of his life, couldn't carry it anymore. That's not justice handed down from somewhere above us. That's just the arithmetic of deception. Lies have maintenance costs. Most people can't pay them forever. What I know is that I couldn't have gotten to where I am by focusing on him. I spent the first year after prison furious, which is understandable and also useless. The fury didn't generate revenue. It didn't get me clients. It didn't teach me anything about Medicaid billing compliance or Texas licensing law. Barbara O.C. was the one who told me very plainly that I had a choice about where to put my energy, and that putting it toward the people who had hurt me was essentially continuing to let them control my time. She wasn't wrong. She rarely was. What I built because I made a decision to be rigorous about what I let into my mind every morning. Not positive thinking in the greeting card sense. I don't have much patience for that. I mean something more like discipline. The discipline to learn something new when it would have been easier to give up. The discipline to stay modest when the money started coming in, because I understood in my bones what it felt like to have nothing, and I wasn't going to be careless with what I'd earned. The discipline to wait on Claudette, even when waiting felt unbearable, because I knew that forcing the truth on someone who isn't ready to hear it only makes them defend the lie harder. Claudette asked me once, at that restaurant table, how I didn't become bitter. I told her the truth. I did, for a while. Bitterness is a reasonable first response to being betrayed by people who are supposed to protect you. The question isn't whether you feel it. The question is whether you let it become your personality. I watched women in that federal facility who had organized their entire identities around what had been done to them, and I understood it. But I also saw where it led, which was nowhere you'd want to go. What I kept coming back to every time I wanted to stop was the simplest possible version of the question. What do I actually want my life to look like? Not what do I want them to suffer? Not what do I want people to know about what was done to me? What do I want my actual daily life to look like in 5 years? In 10 years? And the answer to that question had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with building. My granddaughter came into my office last week and sat in my chair and spun around in it 3 times before asking me what all my papers were about. I told her I was working on something important. She asked if it was more important than spinning. I said probably not. She accepted that and kept spinning. That's the whole thing, really. You survive what tries to erase you. You build something real. And one day someone who came from you sits in the chair you earned and spins around in it without knowing yet what it cost. And that's not a tragedy. That's exactly what you work for.